If you export to Europe or you buy from suppliers who do, there's a legal storm brewing that most contracts weren't written to handle. CBAM isn't just about carbon prices. It's about who pays when data is wrong, who is liable when suppliers won't cooperate, and it's about what happens when your certification doesn't match what EU customs expects. I'm talking about the legal issues that are already landing in inboxes and will be landing in courtrooms soon. Let's break this down to what governments, businesses, and investors need to be watching and what you need to do before the end of this quarter. Most international supply contracts were drafted before CBAM existed. They don't address issues such as who provides emissions data, what happens if that data is inaccurate, who pays the CBAM charge if carbon content is higher than expected, what force majeure really means when the regulation changes. Here's a scenario to consider. An African aluminium producer has a long-term offtake agreement with an European buyer. The contract was signed in 2021 and it runs through to 2028, but it says nothing about carbon verification. Now, the European buyer needs granular emissions data to file CBAM reports. The African producer doesn't have it at all, or doesn't want to share proprietary operational data with the European buyer. So the buyer faces penalties for late filing. The producer faces contract termination threats. Under this scenario, who actually wins? Well, it's the lawyers that win. Everyone else loses time, money, and the relationship. Starting 2026, your emissions data need third-party verification by an EU-accredited body. Sounds straightforward, right? But no, it isn't. There are not enough accredited verifiers in Africa. As of early 2026, the network is thin. Demand is about to spike. Lead times will stretch. But here is a legal issue. If your verification is delayed and your importer misses a deadline, who is liable? If the verifier makes an error and customs challenges your data, who pays the penalties? Your contracts need to address verification risk explicitly. If they don't, you're operating in a liability gray zone. The EU has published implementing regulations, but the detailed guidance on specific sectors is still evolving. What counts as actual emissions for your specific process? How do you handle complex products with multiple production stages across different countries? The legal risk is this. You could build a compliance system based on today's interpretation, only to have the EU clarify the rules differently next year. That's not hypothetical at all. It's how regulatory rollout works. So for investors, this creates a valuation problem. How do you price an asset when the compliance costs are uncertain and could shift significantly based on regulatory guidance that hasn't been published or issued yet? Here are 3 strategies to help you navigate legal issues around the CBAM. The first is contract audits. Every agreement that involves goods flowing to the EU needs a CBAM clause review. That's not a casual read, a systemic legal audit with red lines drawn on data sharing, liability, and cost allocation. The second tip is to verify your verifiers. If you are in a CBAM exposed sector, identify who can verify your emissions data and lock in engagement terms now. Do not wait for the rush. Third, do scenario planning. Model what happens if the EU tightens the methodology for your sector. If they expand the scope to cover indirect emissions more aggressively, if they change how they calculate default values, assess all of that. Legal strategy needs to include regulatory contingency planning. Here's a tip for governments. For governments, know this. You are not just dealing with CBAM compliance. You are dealing with trade policy positioning. The countries that get ahead of this are countries that develop verification capacity. They are countries that engage Brussels on mutual recognition. They also support their exporters with technical assistance. These countries will protect market access. Those that wait will be playing catch up with the rules written without their inputs. Your legal exposure is already active. It is active in contracts you are bound by, in supply chains you depend on, and in investments you've already made. The question is whether you are managing that exposure proactively or waiting for the first dispute to force your hand. So here's my suggestion. Be the one writing the playbook, not the one responding to it. My name is Pauline Anaman. I'm a transactions lawyer and a green transition strategist, helping governments, businesses, and investors like you navigate risk and capture long-term value in Africa's emerging green economy.